send me anywhere, only go with me. Lay any burden on me, only sustain me. And sever any tie in my heart, except the tie that binds my heart to yours. If you have men who will only come if they know there is a good road, I don't want them. I want men who will come if there is no road at all. I will go anywhere, provided it be forward. David Livingston.
Thank you so much, Mary Bird. Welcome everyone to Gems from the Wisdom Traditions, a conversation circle that is sponsored by Still and Living Center, and that this year is taking up the annual theme of irreversibility, eyes to the stars. So that forward momentum is very much aligned with this idea of irreversibility. And additionally, with this idea that the stars are traveling irreversibly forward, no matter what they might look like to us sometimes. We are taking up for consideration today the topic of the Zodiac. We're very fortunate to have with us once again, as I had Sharone. Thank you so much for assisting us today, Sharone. As I was having her send out the recordings of today's speaker, I realized that he's been coming regularly each year since we started GEMS. So this is his fourth presentation at GEMS, and we're so grateful to have Piyush Kumar. He is, could be, I think it would be okay for me to say, Piyush, that you have strong roots in the Kashmiri Shaivite tradition of Hinduism. And he's also very much a student of global philosophical and spiritual traditions of the world. I'm going to give him plenty of time by turning it over to Piyush Kumar at this point, and then we'll go into a conversation amongst the entire circle of it. Piyush?
Well, thank you, Renee. And yeah, it's always a pleasure to be back here, and it is, it's quite a beautiful reflection just to notice that, I've been coming here every year, and that's, it's just something about that rhythm and that familiarity that it creates. I mean, it's beautiful, and especially, I cherish that more and more, in these days and age where things are just very transitory and very dynamic and very involved. So good to see everyone, and and I'm also happy to see some familiar faces as well, and some new ones too. And I'm just reflecting on just this 30-second conversation I had with Sharon at the start of the circle here. It was actually a beautiful surprise, Renee, that, when you reached out to me about this particular theme and, and just the invitation to talk about astrology. Astrology is just such a dear sort of concept for me. It has influenced me in many different areas of life, and primarily just to help me make sense of myself and the world. And I have some 7 or 8 slides of images that I'll share, and that'll help us to kind of go into it. But I just wanted to express this gratitude before I move into it. Having said that, I would like to share my screen. So let's see. Maybe Sharon, could you help me give the right permissions? Yeah, thank you. Okay, good. That should be it. And let me know when you can see my screen here. I'm also trying to actually adjust a couple of settings here on my side too. So just give me 1 second.
We can see it now. Thank you, Piyush.
Okay, thank you, Renee. And I'll just yeah, just give me a second here. It's my computer is actually resetting with the screen share and all that.
You know, I do want to say that Piyush is speaking on the archetypal astrology tradition and with references to Vedic astrology. So that's probably important to note as well, since we're speaking of gems from the wisdom traditions.
Yeah, so I actually I think it disappeared here. So
It was so interesting for me to go back and listen to part of his first presentation to us, which had to do with the rhythms and cycles of nature, and realize, oh my gosh, he was already talking to us from a zodiacal perspective 4 years ago without my even realizing that is what I had asked for. It was in regard to this idea of completing a cycle.
indeed, I mean, the astrology is just, I mean, all these concepts at some point in time they start aligning together, and they all come from a spiritual principle. And I'll actually just say more about it. But let me just go through these slides, because I think they'll actually create some kind of a narrative here. So as Renee, you were saying, we're talking about archetypal astrology, and specifically, actually less so from a Vedic perspective, or more from kind of like animistic, esoteric perspectives. And the reason for that is because, the Vedic sort of like, when we call something like a Vedic astrology, it more so refers to the system of astrology, rather than the essence behind it. And they, I mean, and it's the systems of astrology, like when we call Vedic astrology. I mean, it's profound in its own ways, and it's very, very deep, and there's a depth of knowledge there, right? And I don't think the 20-minute conversation can do justice to it. And there's many more people who are much better experts than me on that one. So I wanted to just share sort of like, what is the essence of astrology? Like, what role does it play, or could play in anyone's life? And I want to take an esoteric and mystic perspective on it, specifically talking about archetypal astrology. So when we look at the stars, right, that's the theme, eyes to the stars. I mean, stars have always showed up looking at the stars kind of gives us this sense of awe and inspiration and attraction. When I look at the stars, it fills me up with hope. I remember in those times where hope is generally difficult to find. It's easy for me to access the sky and look up there and realize that there are many more possibilities. The universe is big, the cosmos is big, and so the ways of being and the world of realms are infinite in many ways, or at least it offers multiple possibilities. Often when people come to astrology, they turn towards astrology in the moments of personal crisis. They're looking for answers. They're looking for different ways of understanding themselves or making sense of the world. And it usually happens when existing models of knowing and making sense of the world breaks down. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason, because what we recognize in those moments when nothing makes sense is that the ego structures that we have built, and I don't mean that in a negative way. It's just so happens that we are finite beings, and that's the function of the ego. That whatever we have built, our rationality cannot make sense of what exists in, right? So we start looking towards the mysterious. We start looking towards the irrationality of the universe. for us to actually recognize that there is an intelligence beyond ourselves, beyond a finite sense. And this is where astrology is one of those knowledge systems that have lived over multiple millenniums across many different cultures, and there's a reason for that, because it's so irrational. It is not confined by the rational mind, and the faces of astrology are always put in the context of the time we find ourselves in, what we call the zeitgeist. So every era, astrology takes a different meaning. It relates with people differently, either whenever people push it away or whenever people actually accept it, but it's always been there. It's probably one of the oldest systems of knowledge, if, we can call it that. And one of the key things to also recognize when, or at least like I recognize when I talk about astrology, or when I, connect with astrology, is that it's not that the position and patterns of stars and planets make events happen in life. It's not like, this is happening in up there, that's why, it's happening inside me. These are what I call acausal relationships. So there is no cause and effect to it. They happen simultaneously. But what they allow us to do is, when we look up to them, they fill us with awe. They help us see the patterns in the cosmic way of life. And through that recognition, you can see the patterns in our lives as well. It helps us to see and identify these patterns in otherwise very chaotic movement of life and psyche and, everything really. And that's what the function of astrology is in many ways. And so, as I just briefly mentioned, that most cultures, at least that I know of, have looked to the stars and mapped their movements. I mean, astronomy as a science and astrology as a knowledge system of looking at ourselves is present in many different cultures across the world. Many of them developed independently, many of them were influenced by each other, but they did develop there. And many develop very intricate, sophisticated systems to correlate our lives with the movement of the planets, and that's where the birth of astrology really happened. And so if we go into the details of this, you'll find many different systems of astrology. So I mean, Vedic and tropical, or as we call it, sidereal and tropical, happens to be the two most common ones that we follow. There's just so many, and sometimes they're just held through oral traditions, in a tribe. But stars have always been used to help us find the path, very practically as well as figuratively as well. But one of the key things that invites me to look at astrology in an archetypal sense is because beyond the multiplicity of these expressions of cultures and geographies and systems, these movements reflect shared universal qualities and patterns of being human. And these are universal qualities. And in the modern psychological sense, Jung sort of reflected on these concepts. But these concepts were understood by many different people of the land for thousands and thousands of years. And these archetypes that live in a collective psyche, help us, they're collective in nature, and they express individually in various shapes and images and symbols. And we will look at these qualities mythically and archetypally. That's how that's how the ways of astrology help us make sense of these different symbols and images and things that show up in our dreams or show up in our lives. Now, one of the other reasons I follow it from an archetypal / animistic sense is because it kind of blurs this line between what is happening inside and what is happening outside. They kind of become mirror reflections of each other in many ways. So, this is all, I mean, this particular slide kind of just contains a lot of information, but in just very simple terms. So, I'll be foregoing some of the nuances here in the risk of, to capture the broad kind of essence of this knowledge, really. When again, astrology in a way, and looking at the stars, they are expressions of some spiritual principles, or at least the roles that they play in my life are, some recognition of spiritual principles, to remind me in those times, in really any time, to help me ground myself and orient myself towards something really bigger than myself, right? And something that is also tangible in some ways at the same time. So, we are familiar with the aspect of the seven rays. They come from the esoteric principles and so on, right? But these seven rays signify the spiritual principles of the universe. And as they sort of emanate, the planets and the stars and the in the constellations really refract and break down these seven principles into many different expressions of the symbolic and astral life, as we call it. And so what happens is that, we are all talking about the same spiritual principles, whichever tradition we pick up, we're all talking about the same spiritual principles. In the esoteric tradition, they are articulated as the seven principles, right? In the Indian traditions, they are articulated by the, by the creation of the universe and, and the stories of that, right? The stories of the Kumaras and the stories of the Saptarishis and all the progenies that happened after that, right? But essentially, these stories really help us to, in a way, give us tangible references to these spiritual principles. And that's what astrology does as well. It breaks down these spiritual principles into astral and symbolic patterns of life. So when we talk about, astrology is typically based on basically three fundamental concepts, right? And these concepts are centered around signs, planets, and houses, right? And what these categories are, essentially, they are reflections of the astral and the symbolic expressions of the psyche. And again, we don't have time to go through each of the each of the signs and each of the planets and what they signify, but just knowing that that's what they do, can help us find them, can help us recognize them, more tangibly as these symbols and more sort of ethereally just inside ourselves, inside the psyche. And again, why archetypal? I think, I've just said a few things about it, but essentially, one thing I also want to say is that archetypes transcend the finiteness of space and time. And, that's something to recognize because, in the modern world, we have a particular notion of how space and time works. But our internal life is much more rich than that. And there's many different ways we relate with space and time. And archetypes show up in sounds and images and dreams and symbols and so on. And what they are expressing to us is these different ways of being, these different ways of living, these different ways of understanding and doing things. And what archetypes do is they act as a continuous thread across these different events of our life that sometimes might feel disconnected or disjoint, but essentially there is a continuous nature to them. And that continuous nature is defined by my relationship with what is happening externally, internally, but what is happening. So one of the things that I want to share, a lot of the times when we start getting into these very intricate systems is that, it's easy to kind of lose sight of why those systems even exist, right? So the purpose of these systems of thought is to help us find a path in an otherwise chaotic realm. It is to help us find some kind of structure and stability, some kind of a guiding light, or a northern star, in this otherwise chaotic realm. But it's also easy for these systems to create more chaos in our lives. So all the things that I just shared, right? These are not. It's not what we would call Western science, right? It's not. These are not methods of experiments and validity and stuff like that. Even though that does exist in its own capacity in these systems, but it's not about objectively saying that this is what this is, because it is the relationship that we have with this, right? So as we relate with these kind of systems, my invitation is to recognize and ask ourselves that question: what purpose is it serving in my life? Is it helping me find the path? Is it helping me find that orientation, or is it just adding more chaos more? Right. So it is quite possible that this might not be for everyone, or there might be certain changes in which we relate with it, depending on who relates with it, because that's the nature of these systems, right? These are not these very deterministic, definite Western science. There's just much more fluidity to these knowledge of systems. For me, the reason I relate with this is because it helps me to remember various phases of the source. It helps me to be in right relationship, and that's the reason that I connect with it, and that helps me to find my path in this otherwise chaotic world. So, what do I mean by right relationship? Right? I mean, this is a phrase that is very old, really. It was, it's present in many of the Buddhist texts. Many other philosophies and spiritual traditions have referenced it over time. But I just want to share maybe my perspective and how it connects with me in the context of astrology. In the context of astrology, it helps me to go from the questions like, why can't things be this way, or this is dash 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 fault, and why is this happening to me, to that this is happening and this is the way, right? So it moves from a sense of despair, a questioning of despair, a questioning of blame and judgments, to recognizing that these are just various phases of the source, and this is what is happening, and that's why this is. For example, and this is I'm going to be using a very specific astrological reference here. So, for example, when Pluto transits over Saturn, so Pluto represents really this force of change, a force of transformation, and there's a reason for that transformation, and that reason is, in the simplest term, an alignment with a soul's purpose. So when Pluto transits over Saturn, Saturn represents the practical structures that we have in our lives, right? So when that happens, when there's a transit of Pluto over Saturn, there's generally a breakdown of these practical structures in my life that I've come to rely on. So, for instance, my jobs might break. There might be changes or shifts in my home or home situations. My career or social identities could change as well. And this force generally takes a very tangible form. Sometimes it takes an intangible form as well, but it takes a form that we can feel, touch, see, sense, use any of our five senses to recognize it. So it can take the face of my partner, it can take the face of my boss, a parent, or, just some of these systemic forces as well. So it could be easy to say to someone that since you have been in my life, things have been breaking, right? But when I can come to that remembrance that this is what's happening and there's a purpose to that, there's a way in which these events line up. There's something unfolding with that. So what really is happening is that that the time becomes just right for certain kind of dynamics to play out so that the purpose of my soul can unfold. And that particular dynamic in this context of Pluto transiting over Saturn is essentially breaking away with the superfluous of structures and coming to the core of it. Just having enough structures and the right structures in place so that I can continue moving towards the fulfillment of my soul's purpose. And that's a recognition, because that helps me to build the right relationship with the situation, with the people around me, and recognize the role that they are playing in my life, recognize the role that I'm playing in their life. So it's that reorientation, really. So really coming to the end, and then we'll just open up for more conversation. This is just really an obligatory astrological post, because this is an astrology talk. We always like to end with kind of like a reference, a reflection of what is really happening. And it so happens that, today, at least from a tropical reference system, marks a pretty significant day astrologically. So today, Pluto starts a 20-year cycle in Aquarius. Pluto has been sort of like hanging out, moving back and forth in those last degrees of Capricorn and early degrees of Aquarius for the last 1 year, but it's going back and forth because planets tend to do that. They go direct and they go retrograde and so on. But today marks the day when, from now on, it'll be entirely in Aquarius without going back into Capricorn. And this is also marked by the conjunction of Sun. So as I was just sharing, that Pluto represents this very dynamic force of change, of transformation, of really stripping away of the superfluous and recognizing the essential, the essence. While Aquarius is the sign, it's a zodiac sign, and it's a sign of humanity. It's a sign, and it serves a very specific purpose, and it serves a purpose of service. So in the most highest ideals, the Aquarius represents that space where each person, each individual is in service to the humanity, to the notion of humanity as a whole. If you look at, again, the archetypal symbol of Aquarius, it's the sign of the water bearer. The water represents the water of life, and it's the sign of the water bearer who's actually pouring water onto the earth, and that space represents, the earth here represents the collective nature of us, the collective humanity. So it's the individual who's in service, who's pouring these waters of life in service to the humanity. So what we would see as these things happen in these next 20 years of the cycle is really the transformation of social structures towards the highest principles of humanitarian and egalitarian and social justice and so on. And we've started to see that in the last few years there have been massive social justice movements. Many important things have been marked, and we are also seeing worldwide as well how certain conflicts are rising up. They're breaking down structures, and they are opening up for more liberation and more sovereignty of people. So prior to Aquarius, Pluto was in Capricorn, and Capricorn is a sign of structures and systems, because it's ruled by Saturn. So what we saw in the last 20 years was that there was a refinement of structures and systems. There was, we saw industries, coming in and sort of solidifying, right? There was a understanding of like how, for example, in the US, like how the corporate America works, right? There was, focus of efficiency and productivity, and we figured that out, and part of my job, I work in the corporate world, and I see what happened in the last 20, 30 years, and that was phenomenal, and I'm seeing what is happening now. We are all familiar with the AI revolution. And again, one of the aspects of Aquarius, the sign of Aquarius, is also technology. Technology specifically that connects with people, right? And what we see in the last 1 year is that, this big change, big sort of influx of how AI is showing up in people's lives. It is yet to see what role it's going to play, but we are seeing that change. And that is the change that is marked by Pluto in Aquarius. But Pluto is also conjuncting Sun today, which is also very special because that doesn't happen quite often. Not, I mean, when I say often, I mean, it doesn't happen that, Pluto is changing signs and it is conjunct Sun. And, this is one of those cycles that is probably happens once in hundreds of thousands of years, right? I don't have the exact number, but it's rare. And so Sun is, again, archetypally, as we can imagine or feel, Sun is about light and Sun is about warmth, right? Sun is about vitality, the Sun brings life. So what's happening with this is that the warmth of the Sun is lightening up all these deeper realms, all these darker realms that we have maybe pushed away, or we haven't collectively, we haven't, given space and time to breathe, come up as well. So these are the energies again playing with Pluto conjunct Sun. So, it's going to be a ride of a new cycle, of a new pattern as it emerges. And as we said, whenever we come into those spaces of hopelessness, of those spaces of despair, we can always look up to the stars and recognize that there's a much bigger intelligence at play, and hopefully maybe that can help us find some structure and some peace in our life. So thank you. I think I'll pause here and just open up for more conversations.
Oh, thank you so much. I think the beauty of the images that you have shown us doesn't begin to compare really even with the beauty of the ideas that you presented. So thank you so much for sharing both, and particularly your insight after having given obviously great reflection to this topic. And I wanted to maybe start out with the first question. It was very interesting to me that you said something about the stars and the planet and their positioning is not causal to what's happening here on Earth and in our lives. Instead, the way to look at it is there is a simultaneity between the two of those. And I was wondering whether that might be analogous to the idea that, well, if it might be analogous to the idea that when a doctor looks at her or his patient, what the doctor generally first has a view of is the externals, and what those external signals and symptoms present are all indicators of what's going on actually at a deeper level inside the person and their health and well-being. And perhaps in like way, if we come to understand something of the symbology of what's going on in the heavens, that could give us an indication of what's simultaneously going on in our internal world and in the world around us. Is that an apt analogy?
I think that's a very good analogy, Renee. And, often people come to astrology to help them understand about themselves, for all these complex, realm of emotions and energies that are moving within us. I mean, I remember the first time I actually got introduced, well, not introduced, but first time I connected with astrology was the time where somebody was able to articulate things in a way that I'd never heard before. And I was like, how can someone know about this about me that I cannot even articulate it for myself? And that was pretty profound for me. And that, since then I got hooked towards this. I was, and I think that's the recognition, right? It's a way of understanding ourselves. And people often use astrology for that.
Mm. And it seems like when we could look at things from that perspective, that things are happening simultaneously in the heavens and in our lives, it makes us feel potentially like less like a victim. Oh, this is happening up there, and so I'm getting affected like this, and what am I to do? I'm just, a victim of all these things going on somewhere else. And so the fact that you said it's not causal, it's actually happening simultaneously, gives me a much greater sense of agency, and the idea that I can direct my own life much better if I recognize that what's going on in the heavens symbolically represents opportunities and also closed doors in certain senses. What's available, what's not available at this particular time in my life, so that I can make better choices as I move forward.
Yeah, very, very well said. Yes, 100%.
Thank you. I love not being a victim of astrology.
Yeah, that's something that often I that happens too. That people also, when they start connecting with astrology, they come to a point where the question of free will and fate kind of like starts overlapping with each other. And that's a very interesting conversation. And I believe that we also had maybe a Jen's talk that especially shed light on that duality, really. But these are spiritual principles that lots of ancient traditions have talked about. As as above, so below. As inside, so outside. And what they are, at least like my perspective, like what they are talking about or what they're reflecting on is this simultaneity of how however the things are emerging within us, which includes both the fatedness of a physicality, the body, and when I say body, I don't just mean the physical body, the various realms of body that we can understand, we can feel, and also the choices that we have. And it's always that interplay of that, it's always that relationship of that. So it's not that we have absolute free will, and it's also not that we are confined entirely to the fate. It's about that relationship between choice and impact. Choice and the impact of that, the reaction of that, and then further choices and further impact and so on. And and astrology also helps us to reflect on that. Yeah.
Thank you. Sharane.
Hi, yeah. So I just keep thinking that when I hear zodiac in astrology, the first things that comes to mind is Mercury is in retrograde. And I love what Renee was saying because I feel in the past, me personally, and even the people around me justify, making bad decisions and chaos because Mercury is in retrograde. I don't fully understand the concept. I know it's related to the planets and their alignment and something like that. But the excuse is like, no, I'm not making bad choices. It's just the stars, they're not aligned. And I love what she said and what you agreed to of like that sense of like maybe it's a time to simultaneously look into our life, into the world, and kind of like slow down and make better choices or look inwards and, take that time to reflect instead of like victimize or kind of go into that place where it's like, yeah, it's not me, it's the stars, right? Like take some responsibility and like kind of like simultaneously see how we can navigate that time when the stars or the planets are not aligned. So yeah, thank you for that. It's a really good reminder. Yeah.
Thank you, Sharon. I mean, yeah, that's just such a great example of Mercury in retrograde. I mean, you know, so retrograde typically signifies a shift from the norm, right? It's a retrograde is a reversal of something, a reversal of movement. So when Mercury is in retrograde, what's really happening is that Mercury is associated with the mind, and mind is associated with structures because a mind really creates structures within ourselves. And I'm talking about not physical structures necessarily. I'm talking about the ways we make sense of something. So that's the notion of the mind, right? And the ways we make sense of something is allows us to help us like move with that, even in the external world. When I look at, let's say, like if I'm traveling from my home to office, the way I understand how traffic would be, how the roads are, and everything is how I will make my decisions thing, right? So that's the function of the mind. So the retrograde is like is telling us that there's a reversal of something, right? So things are not happening the way they are. But there's a deeper meaning to that too. It's not because things are breaking down. They don't really have to break down for that to happen. Um, you know, when things are retrograde, people typically say, and astrologers typically say, and for very good reason, that we should be looking inwards. And there's a reason for that because that helps us, it helps us to reflect on various things, helps us to see and imagine and create maybe a different way of looking at things, and it opens up new possibilities. But again, like when we talk about looking inwards, right? So who's looking inwards, and what's happening when we are not looking inwards? Who's looking outwards when Mercury is direct, when things are working fine, right? Again, one of the reasons I like archetypal astrology is because it doesn't prescribe this one thing or this another thing, right? It changes. It's really contextualized by what is happening, at that point, where you are, where the world is, where your relationship with that is, and then it helps us to say, okay, well, this is one of the choices that you have that maybe we might not see it otherwise. Um, so it really brings it really brings us not it really brings us in a relationship with everything else. So it's not just like things are happening to me. This is about things are happening, and there's a bigger purpose, a bigger intelligence in the way it's unfolding, and I'm an actor in that, right? But it just changes things. So it's not things are breaking down anymore. It's things are happening differently now. So um, yeah, it's Mercury retrograde is such a good example because it happens quite often. And honestly, sometimes it's also good to just blame it on the stars because we all need that. There's some kind of a humor in that too. Renee, you're on mute if you're saying something.
I was inviting Bob, if he's had a chance to collect his thoughts, to share with us.
Well, thank you very much for the talk. And what struck me is when you said it's about finding our path. And if you put some of those pieces together, we've been talking about in questioning, if we think causally, then why are things happening? Why are things happening as they are in space and time? And the path becomes almost automatically something that you move upon to somewhere. But from what you're saying, we also have to know what the path is. How does the path move? The path is itself moving with or without us. In other words, all of these things are happening and the planets, affecting various aspects of us, but they are also aspects of the cosmic consciousness or mind. And so that mind element really becomes something, if we focus outward, then suddenly the path becomes something very different. It's operating in and of itself, and it's almost like being on the path is sort of dancing with the path, with the patterns that are already there. And so it takes away a lot of the sort of, it's all about me doing things, and more of saying, well, yeah, I have not only is there me, but there is my interrelationship with the sun, the moon, the planets, each of which aspects are different aspects of mind. And so suddenly you really are thinking differently. And I was just, all of that coming together, I don't know what to do with it, but it's kind of an interesting way of rethinking.
Yeah.
It's not all about you, it's all about everything.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Bob. I mean, very beautifully said again. I mean, yeah, that's just exactly it. There's really, I mean, even after we learn all these things, there's really nothing different for us to do. I mean, now this sits with us, and maybe it can help us to open up choices, to think more creatively, but really in a way, things are unfolding, and it's the relationship that we have with that, right? Um, and one of the things that you said, just I loved it in the way you said it. It's a relationship with the sun and the moon, and and this is something that I believe that as we have become, I guess, more and more away from the indigeneity of life, where the spiritual ways of life was just very present to us. We kind of forgot that we are also in relationship with these different energies. A lot of the ancient traditions and religions, they had relationship with these energies in different faces and forms. They would call it gods and goddesses. In India we call them Shaktis as well, or Devis. In Buddhism, you call them Dakinis, and just in again Western traditions you call them Orishas. So there's like all these different energies, right? That people used to be in relationship with, and for someone like us, it's a conscious choice to actually choose to be in a relationship with them, and really it takes our focus away from ourselves to something bigger than ourselves.
And as you said, the simultaneity of all of the elements interacting to create us. So there is water, fire, air, earth, and those things are also, they're not in separation. If they aren't in simultaneity, our organs don't function. I mean, that Chinese medicine element of connecting the elements to the individual organs that we have. Again, it's this kind of inner outer, but all about relationships rather than, what's causing this, too much eggs.
Exactly. And they are also in relationship with us too, and that's the other thing to remember and recognize, that when we choose to be in a relationship with them, and when I say choose, it's it's the consciousness of that, because we're always in relationship with that, regardless of whether we are conscious about it or not. But when we consciously choose to be in a relationship with them, we can also see them being in relationship with us.
and 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 it doesn't have to be a causal relationship. It could also just be, how is all of this complexity working? And that's when you first said, this is all about awe. This is not about you trying to control the processes out there and figure out how they're causally related to each other. It's just, wow, the mystery, the simultaneity of the all, of the everything, uh, the large dance.
Indeed. Oh, Diana, I see you raising your hand.
Me, I don't have all my thoughts together at all. This is all kind of new and exciting. But I'm really struck with the archetypal relationship to astrology. And you said things are unfolding and it's our relationship with that. You know, it's really interesting when we don't see, yes, there's karma, but when we don't see everything as we're the center and we caused it, or where it's our karma. You know, I always say we know about 10% and the rest we don't know, you know, and so it's really interesting. I don't even know what I'm saying or going with this, but there's something around the idea that things are unfolding, and it's how do we relate to this only moment with what is happening without saying I'm at fault or there's a cause, but what is our relationship? And I think that's really profound, that it's really being present in the moment. And what you said was it's happening whether we're conscious of it or not. And when we think of the human of the future, it's being really conscious that we're just a minor little dot. You know, when we think of the cosmos and the on, and we're minor, I mean, we're not even a dot, you know, it's like, but there's all this is going on, and it doesn't mean we don't have free will, that we can choose how we respond. But I really think it is our relationship and how we choose to respond to different things that happen in our life. So for me, I said, I don't really know yet about all this, but it's something about broadening our perspective about things are happening and what kind of relationship do I want to have with things in my life. And I think that's really an important process as we look at human in the future, because there are so many things that we don't like or that are happening, and how do we fix it, or what do we do, and what, you know, and really seeing it as all negative. There's a pattern or something. I have faith that there's something, it's all for good. I don't know how, but there is a faith with that, but it's really, how do I have a relationship with it? So I thank you. That I still don't know what to do with it all, and I have to sit, but I decided to share anyway.
Oh, thank you, Diana. That was great. And I just absolutely appreciated, that reminder that what we have is the moment, right? That's the only thing we have. And how we respond to that moment, that's the choice we have. And all these, I mean, honestly, like all the function of the knowledge, any knowledge, astrological knowledge, scientific knowledge, know-how, common sense, everything, anything we can imagine, is for us to actually recognize our choices that we have in the moment.
Yeah.
Like what we can do, how we can respond in this moment, for us to be able to see that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. There is I'm trying to remember where is this concept from. I believe this is a concept that was from the Vajrayana tradition of Buddhism, which talks about this concept of nowness, and nowness being eternal, because that's the only moment. This is the moment that we have, and it's now, and now is what we always have, right? And and that's the thing, like things like astrology and some of the other sort of knowledge systems helps us to see the breadth and the extent, beyond space and beyond time of the happenings, right? In a way, astrology helps us to see the mandala of the universe, the pattern of the universe, in a very that is evolving in the space and time. But the snapshot of that helps us to see things beyond, like in the past and in the future, and bringing that to the present. Like all of that comes to the now. Right? The now is a combination of all of that. But that was the function of the seers, and that is the function of the seers, right? So every every aspect of humanness, like the aspect of ourselves, who's the seer, who can see things, who can see the past, present, future, you know, also plays a role in this happening.
Renee, you're mute. Oh, sorry.
Eriko, do you want to make a question or make a comment?
Sure. I'm so into astrology, so I was very excited to hear your story today. But it was interesting. I'm like, especially like this year, like you said, like Aquarius year starting. Like I'm excited. Like I'm excited for the new change, and it's like a better world. But is that kind of okay to like think like that, or like you just say like you kind of like we should focus on nowness, like own choices. It's just that maybe the universal change is there, but it's not, you should not be affected or like think ahead like it's going to change like this way, so like we should like make choice based on the kind of like a future. So can you tell me that?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Eriko. And this is where we run into the paradox of language, is what I call it. The concept of now does not mean that we do not think about the future. Um, and the concept of now is honestly defined by the person who's experiencing that now. So that's a question again for yourself, to ask for yourself how important it is for you to think about the future, and what needs does it serve, what does it uh, what does it play in this, what role does it play for you, for people around you, for with your relationship of people around you, and things around you. Again, when I say people, I mean both human people as well as non-human people in all the senses. But that's a question that one gets to ask about with themselves. I personally like to think about the future sometimes, and I personally don't like to think about the future sometimes. And um, and there's a purpose, there's a reason for that too. Again, also again talking about paradox of language. When I say purpose, it does not mean that it is necessary for everything to have a purpose also, because there's a reason. There's a role in which a sense of purposelessness, or a sense of not not always being compulsively driven to find purpose, is an important thing, because that helps us to experience a creative, or what we call a wild self, genius, creative self. When we recognize that we are acting based on how things are showing up rather than actually trying to make meaning of it, right? So when I talk about, when we say like Pluto is going in Aquarius, now as humans, I feel like it's important for us to orient towards hope, because hope gives us a way in which we see the light, we can align our actions, we can it really gives us energy, gives us life force to keep moving, right? And sometimes thinking about the future and looking at the future helps us to see that hope, right? Or helps us to find that hope. But again, like that's a question that we get to ask for ourselves, right? And it's always that balance between doing and being. It's easy, and that's the, and that's again, that's the, what's the word? That's the irony of any systems of knowledge, that it can help us to see a path, and it can also help us to lead to chaos. So it's again, that's a question we ask ourselves: when is that happening? I mean, it's an action of awareness. It's an action of consciousness. Am I aware enough within myself to see that I am compulsively addicted to something, or that's why I'm maybe compulsively always thinking about the future, or am I thinking about the future because there's something about it that just feels deeply purposeful and deeply meaningful to me, So, and that's the function of astrology as well. Astrology can be used as predictive science, and also it can in a way take our agency away as well when we become compulsively attached to those predictions. So it's a double-edged sword, like any technology, any knowledge.
Like a very helpful answer, Piyush. Yeah. All right, Eriko. Yeah. David.
Oh, hey, thanks, Piyush. Good to see you.
Good to see you, David. Yeah.
Diana, I wanted to say 10% was being generous. But I've been looking for, I like to use metaphors, analogies to sort of understand this idea, going back one to simultaneity and this idea of influence, and how astrology can be predictive. So I thought about the influence of the gravitational pull around planets that that our astrophysicists use to slingshot their spaceships around, because you got to get that just right. There's an influence of nature that's very present there, and without the use of that, they wouldn't be able to make it to their next destination. So it's an influence that's there. Whether or not you hit the timing right is kind of, did you did you do your homework? Did you do the math? Were you there, present in the moment when that influence was available? So I think in that way, to know what the influences are, one can best utilize those influences, and I think that's that way. I did have another thought, just real quickly, of this idea of moving from Pluto from Capricorn into Aquarius on the technology side. Is these last 20 years we've been building these mega hardware platforms on which now AI is running. And I'm thinking that's that next 20 years that we won't even be able to recognize when 20 years from now, when we look back, it's not the world that we know. And I think that's that whole next evolutionary leap that is riding on that same influence that that is reflected in Pluto's relationship to the sun.
Yeah, those are good reflections, David. I agree. I mean, when I look back 20 years ago, I mean, just like 3 years ago, who would have imagined that, what we are seeing with the AI today would be there? And by the way, so I have a background in AI. I did my PhD in AI. So I've been very, I've been familiar with this technology for quite a few years. I remember, the time when, some interesting things started to happen in the AI space. And I'm talking about a few years ago. One of the things that people always said, right, that creativity, like being able to generate images and being able to generate, like, text, stories, and things like that, would be the last thing that AI would ever touch, right? And it so happened that it actually became one of the first things that AI, like, in many ways, that it touched. And it just says something to the testament of, how things evolve and how things move is, they are surprising many times, and they're the function of mystery in many ways. So who knows that what would happen 20 years later? But one of the things that actually stood out to me, in what you were saying, is that there is a continuity to things. That in the last 20 years, the hardwares that came up, those hardwares are now being used to run AI, right? There's a continuity to these things, and that is always the case, right? There's always a continuity of things. Things don't happen, it's not like we don't lose, things in between and then something else happens, right? There's a flow, and it's a recognition again. It's a relationship with what we recognize and what we see and what we remember about ourselves and about what's happening.
Oh my gosh, I just looked at the time.
It's right now.
Yeah, right. It just flew. Oh my. Well, let me mention that our talks of conversation will be over the next week or two. Meanwhile, someone is preparing to give Piyush a vote of thanks for this lovely presentation and conversation that we've had. So one moment, I want to have my almanac so I get this right. Next week's theme will be, what does the soul need for its evolution? And if I'm right, I think Kai, who's there, and a black box with White Writing is going to give us a talk on that idea from the nutritional tradition. Is that correct, Kai?
Yeah, something like that.
Okay, cool. And I believe that Sharone, the following week, is going to speak to us on the yogic paths from the yogi tradition, perhaps Patanjali in particular. All right. So those are the upcoming 2 topics. And so who today would like to give our vote of thanks to Piyush for this day's marvelous conversation? Okay, Diana, I'll have to ask you to unmute.
Yeah, this has been fascinating and opened up doors for all of us that, you know, we just, there's a lot to think about. It's not something that I could respond to quickly because I think it's very deep and it's very important. And I really thank you for opening up the doors and the availability to talk about it, and also to see a different way of seeing the world. And archetypal astrology is something I've never heard about. And so it's a whole new way of looking at known things. And I think that's exciting because it allows us to see our world in a different way. So thank you so much. It's really, I'm looking forward to doing more exploration.
Yes.
Oh, thank you so much, Diana. And thank you so much, Renee and Sharon, for having me here as well. I mean, it's always a delight. And I appreciate the questions and the dialogue. And, you know, every time I come here to give a talk, I also go back with lots of learnings and just recognition, you know, as I call it. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Piyush, would you be willing to stay on the line for a couple minutes if anybody has any remaining comments or questions after we officially?
Yeah, maybe just get 2 or 3 more minutes, just in
Okay.
case if there's something more.
All right. Thank you, everyone. If you would like to stay for a minute or 2, you're very free to do that. I was going to, I guess, ask Piyush with the idea that a little knowledge can be dangerous. Would you say that taking up the study of astrology is something best done if one's willing to dive into a pretty deep level rather than just kind of play about on the surface?
Yeah, that's a very, very interesting question, Renee. And I have mixed opinions about that. It's not one way or the other. Yeah, and there's a reason. You know, yeah, you know, there's a reason for that, because you know, I agree with you on one level that you know, when people kind of just connect with astrology on the superficial level, you know, they get kind of attached to those just very specific things happening, right? You know, if so and so happens, then you know, if Jupiter moves into Cancer or something, then I'll have, like, you know, really good home life or something like that. I mean, people get attached to those ideas, and then, you know, it's just like they're just kind of confined by that, right? Unless they can recognize a deeper level and their choices and their actions and their relationship and all of it. And it just opens up a whole new richness to it, you know. And on the other hand, you know, this is something that, from an archetypal perspective again, you know, without any puns really, is that, you know, even how things show up in people's lives, there's some kind of a reason and some kind of an understanding of that. So it is quite possible, you know, if something like an astrology comes up in people's life, which is at the superficial level, maybe that's what people need at that time. Maybe people just need some kind of a assurance or some kind of, you know, something to rely on external to themselves that they can use as a stick to walk, you know. And yeah, Bob, go ahead. I'd love to hear what you say.
Yeah, no, as you were speaking, it just struck me that in Buddhism, there are 3 bodies of the Buddha.
Mhm.
And you can say, well, why 3 bodies? Well, because they operate differently. There is the Nirmanakaya, the now body. And that's kind of in that causal realm of my knees hurt and why. And you're kind of always interested in that as long as you're in that body. But there's also the Dharmakaya, the
Mhm.
big, the cosmic mind aspect. And really that questioning is cosmic. It's not local. And so that's the way the Dharma of all being exists. That's the bigger patterns. And you can move back and forth between these 2 bodies, but they're different. And the third body is the Sambhogakaya, the action body. And that's, as we were sort of saying, how do you move into action with that and relate to the future? Well, that's its own body too. And so, if you think in that term, then you're not, like you said, the simultaneity would immediately put you in the Dharmakaya way of looking at things.
Mhm.
But where also Shakyamuni actually lived. That's the Nirmanakaya. He was the physical, healthy, historical body of the Buddha. And so it struck me that maybe, our typical ways of thinking force you into that kind of way, that the path isn't just simply a road, it's actually a complex aspect of how you interrelate. So
Yeah.
it struck me as being very interesting in that regard. And
Yeah.
automatically we want to push it into the causal because that's where we live.
Yeah.
But we live cosmically too.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Bob. And that's such a thing, right? I mean, I guess like the orientation of the talk today, in this way was more towards the Dhammakaya because, we live in this world which likes to assign itself causalities, because that's how we think. Our minds function that way, right? It would be a very different experience if we were talking to, if this was a conversation with where all of us was maybe living in Himalayas in an ascetic lifestyle, where a reference of understanding and knowledge and seeing was all internal, which is beyond space and time. For them, maybe it would be more about how do you bring them back into causality, because we live all these lives, right? So yeah,
And when Diane was talking,
it's
self-will, where does that fit into all of this? From a spiritual point of view, I was just reading in the book of St. John and the Gospels in general, it's not my will, but thine be done. So spiritually, you have to get out of your ego. I mean, die to live is in the Bible as well, that your ego part has to die for you to be able to experience the cosmic, the unconscious, the larger.
Aren't we
that's
lucky
why,
in our group, Piyush?
just say again, Renee.
Aren't we lucky to have Bob in our group making little comments from all these different religions?
I love that. I mean, I appreciate that because that's also another essence of what we are seeing in this present world is that it's just there's a lot of relationships across these religious boundaries as well, and there's something about that. Yeah, thank you, Bob. I appreciate that so much.
Can I ask a last question, Piyush? Maybe there's somebody else who wants to ask their last question. Mine is, do you put out something on a daily or weekly basis that gives somebody a kind of a little glimpse into what's happening in the general cosmos?
I
Or is
don't,
it
unfortunately. That's something that I've tried to do, but just somehow like my schedule and everything, it just becomes hard for me to be consistent with that.
Yeah.
But there are very good resources, and I'll be happy to share that. It's a very good astrologer, very insightful to do that, and who do that almost consistently. So, so that's
Okay, well, maybe is there an archetypal astrology website, for example, that would be a good resource?
yeah, I can. I don't remember the top of my head, but there certainly is, and I can share that. Yeah. There is Well, actually, one of the people, and she's well known in certain circles. So I don't know if you know about them. So Guru Ratana is what they call. So they are a yogic as well as an astrologer. They are like in their 80s right now.
Guru, what?
Ratana, Rattana, and they put out, they don't call it archetypal astrology, but their writing is very much archetypal in background. And I can share, send out some of the links offline. So, yeah.
That would be helpful, and maybe then Sharani could do a follow-up by sending those out to the people who attended today.
Indeed.
It's kind of interesting too that we think of ourselves, oh, I'm a Scorpio or I'm an Aquarius. But if you actually have your astrological reading, then you realize how complicated it is, because you have a moon, a sun sign, all of the different planetary signs. And so there's a whole bunch of ways in which you uniquely fall into the cosmos. And, being Scorpio is just one aspect of that. What is your rising sign? What is your moon sign? What is your, as you said, Mercury is the mind. So what's that? That kind of thing. And so that reading is immediately looking at the complexity also and uniqueness.
Yeah. And that's, it happens quite often. I mean, I do readings as well professionally for some people. And quite often, some of the charts I look at, their sun would be in one placement, but their overall chart would give a totally different essence to them. Like a Scorpio sun, someone with a Scorpio sun their chart might actually show up more like a Sagittarius or something. And that happens quite frequently, much more frequently than people would imagine. And also with that, and this is also another interesting thing, is that the birth chart, as we call it, that's also an imprint. It's not the ultimate truth either. It's a form of conditioning. It's a form of you could call it karmic conditioning of the soul, in an evolutionary sense. So while that is something that is very critical and essential in the ways of how we function and how we evolve and what purpose and meaning and all of that stuff in life is, but that's not the only thing, because the essence, the truth is all is beyond the imprint that we have as well. So, but that opens up into more things there. So I guess we can probably pause at that point. I also have to unfortunately go, but I would love to stay for the more conversations. But,
And just real quick, I want to say for Bob and Renee, maybe you know about this, Piyush. I grew up in this like Zodiac era. Like, what's your sign? What element are you? Okay, fire, air is too crazy, things like that. So I'm not familiar with the depth that we went in today. So thank you so much for that. And also listening to Bob and Renee just kind of take it out their own perspective is amazing. But there is this app that kind of like educate me a little bit on it and kind of like explains a lot of what you're saying. It's called CoStart, and it's like kind of personalized astrology, and it kind of like personalize it to you, but it also explains a lot about the way the planets work, and it explains to you like what's behind it. It's not just telling you like today you're supposed to be more sensible and things like that. It explains what's happening in the universe. So if you would like to download it and check it out, I'm not sponsored by them. Just letting you know. It's called CoStart.
Wonderful. Thank you so much again, Piyush, for your time, your energy, your love.
Yeah, thank you, Renee. Thank you for all that. For all
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Mahalo, aloha.
Mahalo.
Yeah.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.